This is my friend Brian and I designing a table that will soon become the ultimate Christmas gift surprise for his wife Lori, since they've talked for years about having a place where they could always have a game of chess going on. What Brian doesn't know is that I'm going to surprise him, because the perfect time to surprise someone is when they aren't expecting it. But how do I do that without Brian finding out, and also without the help of Lori, since that might accidentally spoil both surprises? The first thing Brian and I did was sit down and talk through what he knew Lori would and wouldn't like in a tall top table, also known as a bar table or a pub table. The good news is they both share the same sense of style and enjoy the architectural designs of Frank Lloyd Wright. So we wouldn't be making something he likes and thinks she likes, but she doesn't really like. Because of the short timeline before Christmas, Brian was going to have a woodworking shop build it based on the design I helped him with. All the quick sketches from that meeting were referenced while creating the first draft of the design in the computer. And those were made into life-size prints that were put on foam core and then cut out, so we could quickly have an as close as possible representation of size and proportions. While looking at it together so I could get his feedback, Brian mentioned that Lori and he liked the idea of having a table because they could always have a chess game going on, so they would always be doing something together. Yep, they're a lovable couple. I asked if he wanted a chessboard built into the tabletop. He liked the idea, but preferred to get a chess set later and didn't want to lock the table into just one kind of game. This is when it hit me and I knew exactly how I was going to surprise Brian. What if I took the design stylings that were a part of the table I knew they were going to enjoy and applied them to their own one-of-a-kind chess set? Then Lori would be surprised by Brian and Brian would be surprised by me. It would be a surprise-a-palooza of
epic proportions.
After making changes to the table design and getting them to the woodworkers later that night, I started on the chess set. After some research, it seemed like pretty much every chessboard had some kind of frame around it, and sometimes had a storage box underneath for the pieces. But since Brian and Lori are always going to have a game going on, they won't need to store the pieces. And since they like strong vertical lines, if the chessboard was surrounded by a frame, the vertical lines created by the different color squares being next to each other wouldn't be visible. Since time was short and the board was going to be pretty simple, I started on that while thinking through what the chess pieces could look like. The table was going to be made out of cherry, so I got some of that and maple, since the colors of those two woods contrast each other nicely. They got cut into strips, glued together, clamped, dried, unclamped, cut in the strips the opposite way. Every other one got flipped, glued together, clamped, dried, unclamped one more time, and then the chessboard was almost finished. At least, that is what I thought was going to happen. Things were looking pretty good until I put the board on the table. Unfortunately, it was warped, and not by a little, and not in just one way. It wasn't going to be possible for me to get it perfectly flat. And since the goal was not to have a frame or base, there wasn't going to be any way to hide problems. Since I didn't know what to do, I moved on to making the chess pieces. I wasn't trying to avoid the problem. I've just had enough experiences with design challenges to know that sometimes the best thing to do is not focus on them. In the meantime, some part of my brain, way in the back, would keep thinking about it. And before I know it, a possible solution or next step will come to mind. So while the back of my brain was thinking, I sketched chess piece designs using the same elements that influenced the look of the table. After finalizing the designs, I knew I wasn't going to have the time to make them all by hand. But the designs were simple enough that I could take the time to learn the basics of a computer modeling program to build them digitally, and then have them 3D printed like the parts to the helmet I made for my friend George a while ago. Some of them got printed by a friend, and the printer didn't do that good of a job. It was a bummer. I'm not gonna even show you what they look like. It was pretty sad. But the good news is I realized what could be done to the chessboard. So I stepped away from the problem of the chess pieces, moved back to that. I remembered that my friend Brent has a CNC machine, which is basically kind of like a drill connected to a computer that can move around above a table, cutting stuff the way you want. The chessboard was placed on top of another board and friction fit with blocks and shims so it couldn't move around. Brent's co-worker Jesse attached the baseboard to the table and then used the CNC to flatten one side perfectly. It was so fun to watch a machine do something in a couple of minutes that I wouldn't have ever been able to do. After that, he took it off the CNC, flipped it over, and ran it through a drum sander multiple times to slowly and gently flatten the other side. Now it was perfectly and beautifully flat. Success! After softening the edges a little bit, I was gonna do the stain and finish myself, since the furniture maker's shop was far away. And I knew Lori and Brian would appreciate the chessboard matching the table. But after asking the furniture makers, I found out the stains and finishes they use weren't available anywhere near me. This could have been a problem, but they quickly offered to do all of it for me. At the same time, they were staining and finishing the table. I enjoy long car rides, so getting to do that, having the chessboard match the table, and getting to see the table being finished was great. Plus, an answer hadn't arrived from the back of my brain on how to make all the chess pieces before Christmas. So a 4.5-hour drive to and from the furniture makers would give me plenty of time to think about it. The challenge was that due to their production schedule, they needed to start the process by 9 in the morning. With some family events for me the night before, I was gonna have to leave that morning by 4 a.m. to get there in time. Have I ever mentioned that I am not a morning person? Thankfully, I had multiple alarms, plenty of coffee, and got there in time for everything to start. It was really fun to see the table in person. They had made a few design changes, and all of them make it a better table. Everything got stained and polyurethane, went through the drying process, lightly sanded, wiped down, polyurethaned again, dried, lightly sanded, wiped down and polyurethaned again. Every time, the pieces got smoother and more protected. It was an amazing process to watch, and they couldn't have been nicer showing me how they make stuff and the time and care they put into every single piece. On the way home, I realized that it was a good thing I hadn't been able to print out all the chess pieces. Instead, it would be better to print just a few, so Lori and Brian could see what they look like, and then offer them the ability to make design changes and pick the final colors they would love. I still wanted to somehow show them what all the pieces would look like on the board, so the designs were printed and placed on foam core. In the meantime, another friend was able to print a few of the chess pieces, and they all got glued together, and squares of felt attached to the bottoms so they wouldn't scrape anything. Bumpers got added to the bottom of the board to lift it up just a little for airflow. Brian had gone to pick up their son Sean from college. On the way back, they got the table and asked to hide it at our place for a few days. Being reminded that Sean was back in town gave me the answer for how I was gonna get the presents into their house. Everything got wrapped up on Christmas Eve, also known as December 23rd, and then Sean picked it up while Brian, Lori, and their daughter were at an event. On Christmas Eve, Brian and Sean came over and they got the table. Now, it was just time to wait.
Merry Christmas!
Ooh. Wow! Okay, do I get to open this first?
Yes. Definitely.
Wow, look at this thing. This is so nice!
So they did a little extra something. This is for you to open. Yes, for you to open.
Dave, what is he doing? He's crazy.
Now Dave's surprising me. Thanks for letting me be a part of your awesome surprise for Lori. Now it's a surprise for you. Merry Christmas, Dave. Really thought of. Oh my God.
Wow! Look at that!
Holy cow. Look at that.
Whoa.
You knew that? Oh my gosh!
Oh my goodness,
That
Dave.
is beautiful. Step 2 for Lori. Look. Lori, inside is a first draft of what could go with what Brian opened. If you like it or want changes, let me know and I'll get it made. Merry Christmas, Dave. Oh, this is so cool. Look at all these. Oh my god, they're like little characters. They're like mini figurines.
Oh, that's...
This project was a lot of fun, and there were unexpected surprises at pretty much every step along the way. But to be honest, the more I do this, the less I'm surprised by the surprises. In fact, the surprises are kind of expected. Most ideas end up being at least a little or a lot different than originally intended. And it isn't necessarily a failure that causes this to happen. It's just a part of the process. So the sooner you move past being frustrated by something not going the way you wanted, the sooner you can ask the question, what could be done now? These bumps along the way usually make an idea arrive even better than you first expected. And even if they don't, working through problems and discovering solutions will all grow the skills you've been given to make for others.
That was the chessboard. If you pull one out, the chessboard only needs about 16 or 17 objects. And then so you have plenty of room to put Lori has to